Hi everyone. Good afternoon. This is Rajesh here. Uh, we thought we'll connect with you over, this period as we're all working from home. The good thing about connecting with all of you is that we now have the advent of technology that lets us speak to each other, see each other, and every one of us has gone through a certain kind of change in our behavior in terms of the adaptation that we've gone through, in terms of working from home, getting connected to people over a particular medium. It could be the phone, the media, the video chats, etc. So what we wanted to think was, how does consumer behavior change over a period of time? Consumer behavior, preferential as this was over a long period of time, has always been very stubborn to shift. People don't really change so often. People don't really make changes, especially when it comes to things they're very close to. So what we thought was this would possibly be a good discussion, given that we are actually in the middle of a pandemic. We are in a point where social distancing is being followed by everybody. We are trying to see how this unprecedented times has actually made preferences shift for people. And just discussing this individually may not make sense. So we thought we'll get somebody from the industry who's an expert. So joining us today is Mr. Nikhil Singh. Nikhil is an alumnus of IIM Lucknow, and he comes with a fair amount of experience, actually close to 15 years of experience across large brands like Puma, L'Oreal, Coffee Day. So it was, I thought, a very good idea for us to connect with somebody from the industry so that all of us can actually get some inference into the thought process that is happening in the industry with respect to this. How are consumers changing preferences? How are these preferences leading to companies changing their strategies? And what is the mitigation plan that people have got in terms of how do we address the pandemic? Because for some companies, it has become a large boon in itself, and for some other companies, it's become a bane. So, what I would like to do is, without further ado, Nikhil, if you can just join us, Nikhil. Welcome to the
Thanks,
forum.
Rajesh. Thank you, Rajesh, and I really appreciate the folks from your team that have joined in this webinar. It's a pleasure to be invited by you guys, and I look forward to sharing my thoughts, insights on some of the discussions that we are looking forward to have.
Great. So, all of finite, I take this pleasure in welcoming Nikhil onto the webinar, onto the discussion. During my chat with Nikhil, I thought I'm going to cover some of the topics which range from the way we are connected today to people, the way the organizations are making their changes according to the current times, how consumers are focused, etc. How are they looking at their internal data? How is the whole digitization thing? Is there a transformation that is happening in the digitization space? And also, is consumer behavior actually impacting certain kind of industries, especially let's say the ones that we're very close to, CPG, retail? How is it impacting retail, etc.? So, without further ado, Nikhil, one of the questions that has always been on the top of my mind is, um, I come from a phase where started life, technology life started with pages. From pages, we moved to very simple mobile phones where one would think a lot of times before making a call or even receiving a call used to cost money and things like those. To today, where pretty much everything is there in that screen that you hold in your hand. And this whole advent of smartphones, this whole advent of mobile phones, and the whole concept of video chat and things like those, how do you think that has actually changed the way companies are looking at it from more of a corporate view? And what do you think are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's interesting, and you rightfully said, Rajesh, that I think all of us, at least the younger ones, will feel that we belong to an era where we have seen the first smartphone, the Nokia 3310, and we have seen the first Panasonic, and then we have seen the first Motorola's, and then we have seen the first iPhone, and then we have seen the laptops, and then we have seen the drones, and now we are seeing COVID, right? And the beautiful thing about this is the importance of mobile has something that has prevailed for a long period of time. Only the sense that most consumer researchers were saying you should stay away from your mobile and spend more time in the real world. Unfortunately, this pandemic has sent us back to an era where mobile screen itself has become superbly important. So let me throw some insights for you just from an India context, right? India has almost 12% of the world's 3.8 billion internet users, and it only stands second to China. Now, this must be really surprising considering not even half of India has got electricity or internet connection. So you can just understand the opportunity that lies in a country like India. And when most companies, and you must have read about Facebook investing in Geo, why it is so seamless to look at that investment and why most global MNCs are so interested in India. Second interesting anecdote. India is the second highest app downloading country in the world, and this is 2019 data. I don't even know how the COVID era might have, in the last couple of months, might have changed that to a very different ball game. Maybe might be the largest app downloading country in the world. So I think these 2 points tell you that data usage is the primary use case for any telecom operator, right? The voice per minute has really reduced by almost 50%. Data consumption, data revenue per MB has sort of reduced by 90%. So we are talking terminologies, and it's great that you brought it up, that how we started using mobiles to how we're using right now. The way that we consume mobile is very different. Uh, and I think it's extremely important for the consumers of today to understand the importance of mobile. Most brands today, and this is absolutely true, know their consumers very well. I mean, any CPG brand, any retail brand, they have done enough researches to understand what sort of dynamics do their consumers imbibe and what exactly is their consumer. But in today's era, and especially COVID playing the catalyst, it has pushed them to think, I know my user, but do I know my user enough from his mobile lens? You might classify your user as a SEC A, B, C classification, demographic, household income, certain strata, certain societal norms. But that category really doesn't define how that user is on his mobile. His mobile journey might start in the morning, watching news while going to his work, playing games for 2 hours, then reaching his office, checking his social status, saying, "Hey, bored at my office." I don't know, ordering from a food app in the afternoon, uh, doing a little bit of more, I don't know, job hunting on LinkedIn, or just contacting people on LinkedIn in the afternoon, and then maybe in the evening playing games again, and maybe ending his day with a social video call, or even, I don't know, maybe Tinder or maybe dating apps, right? There is so much that a user is doing on his mobile today. And that definition of the user via his mobile consumption habits is so enriching for the today's consumer brands to understand. Because if you don't know what your user is doing, you only think the user is on social media, so you're putting your media dollars on social media. That's not really true. An average Indian female user has more than 25 apps. Isn't that surprising? Put your Google, Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, and other social sort of applications. They might add up to 6, 7, 8. What is the remaining 17 apps on his mobile? So I think it's interesting, and I think more and more brands are getting cognizant of this. More and more interesting insights are creeping up, and I'll be happy to sort of share them through a conversation.
Great, thanks, Nikhil. That was interesting. You touched upon a very important point there in terms of ordering food. So that actually brings me to something that I've been reading a lot about. I've been talking a lot about. I've seen that change happen in my own life, where for a large amount of things we started moving online, and not so much the brick and mortar that we used to go to. CPG, for example, always used to depend on this whole concept of the Kirana stores and then the modern retail and things like those. However, more and more, the millennial is moving towards the online. And my understanding is that, at least in the urban centers, it's very clear that more and more of this movement is happening primarily because of the advent of the mobile phones, of the advent of all the apps that are available, and the convenience that online brings to you. What I would want to understand from you, that this pattern of consumer behavior, how is it impacting organizations, especially the organizations which are also invested largely into brick and mortar retail? What is it that they are doing about this particular consumer behavior change that people are seeing, which now has been accentuated by this whole COVID situation, where you are not just a creature of habit, but you're also a creature of the whole norm that social distancing, stay at home, all those kind of things. So, how do you think the larger corporations or the organizations of running brick and mortar retail, how are they going through this?
So I think there are two aspects to it, and I'll sort of go one by one on each of them. I think there's a global lens to it, and there's an India lens to it. I think predominantly, if you look at India as an economy for the last, I think, 2 to 3 years, most of the sort of preparations to become a digital economy had started almost 3 years back or 4 years back, right? And which is why we are very well prepared and not in a worsened situation as compared to a lot of the other developing countries. What I mean by that is, the government sort of enabled digital payments. They made sure that most of your existence is on a digital platform. They realized that the small and medium sectors or the startup ecosystem needed a boost. They needed that sort of fuel to sustain in the country, right? Because India is geographically a very challenging country. What really works in north doesn't really work in south, doesn't really work in east, and it sort of built that ecosystem to sustain. Most retail stores started talking about omni-channel ecosystem. They talked about brick and mortar completely transforming into omni-channel ecosystem, digitally being enabled as well as sort of able to sustain their development through retail growth. So I think what has happened is, over this, and you rightly said, COVID has accentuated this need for the strategies that were supposed to be put in place maybe a year back in order. But to be really honest, uh, we still represent a very small part of, you and me were discussing before this started that you, me, most people residing in metropolitan cities of the country, the 6 or 7 top cities and tier 2, we really represent a very small part of India, which is India. But there is a large part of India which is called Bharat, right? um, and I think the Bharat side of the story is not completely in sync with this online ordering and the grocery part of essentials being delivered to them online via their mobile orders. And I think just to give you, I mean, perspective, at least when I was working in CPG, almost the modern trade contribution with the biggies like Walmarts and Tesco's and Carrefour's coming to India was still less than 21%. A large part of the India business, actually almost 79%, still comes from general trade store. And what general trade store means? Your nearby stores, your kirana stores, your store that you go to and say, "Bhaiya, can you give me a shampoo?" And the bhaiya decides which shampoo is going to give, right? That's a very essential part of India's business economy, right? So that the impact of that going away uh, is extremely severe, and especially in the CPG ecosystem, it's felt extremely severely, right? E-com, while growing at almost double digits, right, and poised to be sort of growing at triple digits in the nearest economy, it still contributed to less than 10 to 11% of an average large CPG business. Um, what that means is the contribution of e-commerce was very small, because predominantly we are a country which likes to go and buy stuff. But what has happened with COVID is it has thrown the equations out of whack. Now the only way you can get to consume something is if you order online or get it from the nearest store. Essentials have become important to buy. So I think while the new age era user is adapting to the forms of new online ordering, and getting his essentials through online orders, the online ordering ecosystem itself is also trying to understand how do you cope up with this demand. This demand has quadrupled, right? They don't have a supply chain to sustain that kind of demand. The back end supply chain from, let's say, the CPG guys also doesn't exist currently to give them that number of days of stock. So I think that is what a large part of the discussions which is going around is saying, what does supply chain 4.0 looks like? The supply chain 4.0 means, hey, we have a absolute knockdown supply chain ecosystem which says there will be a seamless delivery which will cope up with the simultaneous online orders at scale. which predominantly means that yes, you will have a NOD, which means number of days stocking ecosystem, but how frequently or how gradually can we reduce the time period to refulfill stock if this COVID era sort of continues for a month or 6 months, or we live in an era which is COVID free. So interesting to sort of look into this, because it's really evolving very, very fast. And e-commerce in no way, I mean, it was always poised to become the double digit contributor for any large CPG or retail player. What COVID has done is just played the catalyst. The double digits are now. It is not going to happen. The double digits are now. We just need to find a way how to sort of fulfill that demand pipeline, at least, which is existing. Rajesh, I can't hear you.
So just to everybody on the meeting, I wanted to just say that if you have any questions that you want to ask Nikhil, please use the chat box and go ahead and give me your questions. I'll ask Nikhil those questions when we open for a Q&A in the last 15-20 minutes of our discussion. So please feel free to open up and ask your questions and put them in the chat box. We will make sure that either Nikhil or myself, we will try and answer those questions. Well, thanks, Nikhil. That was really there's a lot of intelligence that is there in terms of how you actually split India into the India and the Bharat story. What it actually it means basically is that when you have consumers of, let's say, completely different kinds of consumers across the country, across a particular geography, especially one like India. How do companies manage this? Let's say, if we were to just take a step back from an organization perspective, digitization, automation are the basic things that people are looking at. How is it that we can start looking at, how does an organization look at data that they've been collecting so far, and suddenly there's going to be a huge chunk of data which is very different, which is the last 2 months of data, and this whole digital transformation that is happening across the industry, which most of the companies are now talking about. What is your outlook on this whole digitization that we are talking about from an industry perspective?
No, very interesting, Rajesh. I think it will be good to sort of, for both of us to actually contribute a 2 cents, because you have immense knowledge yourself across on what's happening on the globe. So I think on my 2 cents is that I think companies did not collect a lot of this customer data, right? A large part of the customer data collection ecosystem existed predominantly because of our CRM channels, right? Your customer retention and loyalty channels, and those are the people who really focused on high degrees of CRM, were the people who were having reasonably large size data. What has sort of transformed in the last 2 to 3 years, and I think it's very interesting as an evolution, and globally it has happened in the last 5 years, it's not very old, is that most large brands are starting to look at their consumers as people who they are spending every dollar to expose an ad to. Now, technically, what they realize is the difference between offline advertising and online advertising is offline advertising, you really don't know what happens, right? You get a end of month Nielsen share of voice, share of market, and you say, hey, this worked, this did not work, and my ad worked. What you can do on digital is everything is measurable, right? To give you perspective, India's market is a fairly large digital market. I can give you the numbers. India is approximately, I think, a 61,860 crore ad market. Out of that, which is growing at approximately 12% CAGR. Digital actually is approximately a 14,800 crore market, growing at a 32% CAGR. And while desktop is on decline in terms of advertising, mobile is on a massive growth, right? 2019 was the year when mobile spends actually surpassed all forms of spends on digital advertising. So when you do that as a brand, you start to think, hey, if I'm spending $1 to expose my ad to a certain user, what do I know about that user? Can I get that first party data, right? And more companies are moving towards that ecosystem of building an intelligence of that first party data, saying that the people who I pay money to see my ad, can I get the habits of that user? If he clicked on my ad, can I get data about my user? Can I start storing this data? If I start storing this data, can I retarget this user? So let's say for a large multi-brand organization, let's say a Unilever or a P&G in a CPG ecosystem, or in retail, let's say a Walmart, they would start thinking, if this particular person from the floor bought a Surf Excel, could I reach out to him again to buy a tea brand as well? Or should I reach out to him for a washing machine in the Walmart store? In a CPG ecosystem, if the person buys face washes, should I reach out? If she's a female, should I reach out for the cosmetic range? Should I reach out for the baby care range? Should I reach out for a men's grooming range because you might have? So I think that data and spillover of media dollars, it's becoming extremely critical for a lot of these brands, and they want today they're extremely at least in today's era, you can see the media spends have declined by almost 65-70%, right? I picked up the phone call on a couple of the CPG friends that I have, and I think I was telling you before this call that all of them are saying, dude, we really want to focus on performance marketing. And what is performance marketing? Any marketing spend on digital dollars that drives a return on investment, quantifiable return on investment. And it's not just a video ad, it's not just a banner, it's not just a display branded advertising. It's becoming extremely crucial in today's world. I don't know if you know of some of these figures, right? I mean, 80% surge in video viewers has happened in the country like India in the last 2 years. 80%. Almost 85% of time spent on online mobile advertising is actually spent on pure video viewing, right? Um, uh, in this COVID era, if you look at exceptions, I mean, India's increase in TV viewership has gone up by 20%, and TV viewership has actually increased, which is quite a surprise, because if you know that DTH has actually on decline because connected TVs are taken over, people are moving towards the OTT ecosystem, app ecosystem. Now DTH has actually seen a surge, and it is surprisingly driven by who? It is actually driven by kids. The 20% increase in viewership is actually being driven by kids because parents have to put something on television for their kids, and that's what is bringing back the television era. News genre has been the biggest sort of gainer during the COVID era, which is not very surprising. It sort of grew by 57%. While the news apps witnessed sort of 8% user growth as well, they have seen a massive amount of time spent and app opens in the last lot of sort of 45 days. So um, I mean, going back to, is data revolutionizing the way we are going to be? Yes, because sitting at home, having work from home as a norm, the new norm, as they all are saying, that the world will never be the same after this, even if it ends 6 months down the line. There will be a new world. The new world will look at data separately, right? Data was, anyways, a very important part of advertising now. Most organizations will start looking at that data from a very digital lens, and they will be having strong systems inbuilt within their organizations to ensure that they understand that data, they're able to decode that data, and they're able to efficiently use that data, whether from an advertising lens or from a customer centric or retention lens. And I think that's the future. Rajesh, I mean, please chime in with your thought processes on some of the clients that you deal with, because you are, Affine is a large data hub in itself.
So interestingly, carrying on the point of the marketing data that we spoke about, if you went about 10 years behind on time, most of the companies would have something called an agency on record. An agency on record would typically decide where should you advertise, what kind of viewership should you be looking at, who is buying your this thing, should you advertise on prime time, should you not advertise on prime time, and those kind of things. Then slowly came the advent of analytics, and people like Affine, we started making the difference in terms of telling you that this whole view on 50% marketing money is wasted. Nobody knows which 50%. So where do I cut down costs? Where do I increase costs and things like those? And that is when analyticians came in and they started doing a media mix optimization kind of study, saying that okay, we will tell you that when you spend 100 rupees in one place, vis-a-vis spending 100 rupees split by 50-50 in two other places, what kind of responses are you getting and things like those. This would then be largely placed on the kind of response that you're getting on that, the ROI metrics completely. So those are some of the things that have gone much larger into play today. From a data standpoint, people are looking at, if I spend 1 rupee, what am I going to get back in return? Not from whether I'm going to get X number of viewers, Y number of eyeballs on my brand, etc., but X amount of dollars that are going to come back to me, Y amount of revenue that I'm going to be earning out of this whole thing.
Yeah.
You did mention Unilever in between when you're talking about the point of can we do cross selling, can we do upselling kind of thing, where to a consumer we say, okay, fine, if you're buying a Surf Excel, can I sell you a tea kind of thing. I actually came across a very interesting example of this where they were actually now interested in understanding when an online consumer goes and shops on Amazon for a Unilever product, they want to go in and understand what kind of consumer is going online to buy a Unilever product, and how do I make sure that when a person or when a consumer is keying in a particular category or a particular product, I actually present to them the right product. And for this, they want to use deep learning in analytics, and they say deep learning can help us actually completely point out to the exact product that the consumer is looking at, because the time span or the span of a consumer on a particular web page looking for a particular product is so small that you have to be as accurate as possible in terms of getting there. So this whole thought of creating a brand, let's say study and things like those, has moved into how do I actually make it a lot more customized to every single individual customer. How do I go down all the way to the consumer in terms of understanding, okay, if I have to customize myself to reach out to a particular kind of consumer, I will do that. But even if I have to go micromanage my whole thing, micro target a particular customer, I will be willing to do that because analytics today can help you do that. From
Yeah,
that
just to
perspective,
interesting. I think just to add on to that, I think digital has evolved itself, right? I mean, data, how you look at data is very different. I mean, what is first party data, second party data? You combine first, second party, you club a little bit of insights into it. You know exactly who your user is. You know where he lives. You know him by his location. You know if he frequently visits gyms. If he goes to malls, which malls does he go to? If he goes to QSR chains, which outlets does he like eating in? This is location data. This is just
yeah,
location data. You know the kind of handset he uses, prepaid, postpaid user. Is he a 10,000 plus, 10,000 minus handset? You know maybe also some insights on how he spends his day across multiple genres of applications. Is he a news guy? Is he a dating guy? The granularity of location insights plus mobile usage habits is so absolutely so high that you can absolutely pinpoint and target the kind of users that you want to. Interesting example that you brought about Unilever, and Unilever is one of the most advanced, I think, globally evolved digital ecosystems, and they understand the user, the importance of the retention of user via his mobile journey, right? When a user searches for a certain product, and I mean there is the Amazon part of it, which is a walled garden, and I'll refrain, I don't have much knowledge on that because there's only so much that you get to know once the user goes to Amazon, and you know what happens after that. That data is lying predominantly with Amazon. But I think a lot of effort is being made by organizations to understand by the time he reaches the place, let's say the final destination, which we do not know what happens from there, how do we make sure that his journey has been the best journey? How do we understand this, the user that we have been able to get to click is retained with us for the longest point of time? This is called lifetime value of a consumer, right? LTV is
yeah,
what is commonly used. The higher the LTV, the better is the channel where you source that customer from. And most brands will experiment multiple channels, right? They will invest in multiple channels on their digital cluster, or their digital sort of charter, and they will realize the highest LTV that they're getting from a particular channel is the channel which they should maximum be looking at. So I think brands are getting smarter, brands are getting more evolved, and then they also get into the granularity saying, not only do I retain this customer across multiple products that I have under my kitty, how do I get to understand his family? And how do I get to understand how many people in his family can be connected to the same? It's one of those telco ads which says, अब आप अपने लिए मोबाइल मत लें, and you take it for an entire family and all your numbers are connected. I don't know if it's a
yeah,
good thing or a bad thing, but then you start really tracing it back to a single device ID or multiple device IDs which are connected to a certain home. So I think it's an evolutionary phase. It's not going anywhere. It's only going to get accentuated, like you said, in the nearing times. And I think such times like COVID has really made us and a country like India to sit on your backseat and think that if we do not have people accessing stores, and if the business on GT or modern trade goes for a toss, how
Mm-hmm.
prepared are we with that data of our users, or how prepared are we on the e-com supply chain funnel to really transform a 70-75% business into this 20-25-30% business coming from e-com. So I think that's going to be an interesting play, and I think in the next 6 months the firms that will evolve and evolve quickly will sustain, and those won't will cease to perish. I think that's the new norm.
In fact, interestingly, it brings me back to an old saying that we grew up with. It said, Muhammad always goes to the mountain. I think it's roles reversed now. Mountain starting to go to Muhammad.
Yeah.
So on that note, Nikhil, we are actually getting some questions coming in. This is from one of my colleagues. So he's asking that I'm going to read it verbatim. Have CXOs shown an appetite to spend more bucks in creating a new data ecosystem, especially spending on infra to move the Kirana store users onto the mobile platforms? I think it's a very
Oh
interesting
yes,
question.
yes, Saurav. I saw your question, and I think absolutely yes. I think, like I said, what has happened in COVID is not present. I think a lot that Rajesh discussed is, and I was telling him as well. When he brought about data digitization, cloud data, having first-party data of consumers, moving to omni-channel. All these discussions have been around for the last 2 to 3 years. In fact, they have been the focus of most conversations in our digital economy and the growing India that we call. Yes, most CXOs, most conversations across large established MNCs is about having first party data and having large data hubs storing that particular data. They might not have the intelligence yet to decode that data, but then there are very smart players in the industry which are doing a fantastic job of managing that data. Adobe Audience Manager is a great example. It's a data management platform, right? It's an expensive platform that many companies can afford it, but it's a fantastic way that stores data and make sure that your customer journey is sort of encapsulated within one ecosystem. So
Great. So, Nikhil, we also have another question from Tanvi. Maybe you're seeing it on your screen as well. Since the global economy has entered the suspected long phase of recession and countries are now driven away from global consumerism to more of local consumerism, how is this thing to change the consumer behavior with respect to brands and commodities?
it's as recent as 3 days, Tanvi, and it's a very interesting question. How you should perceive this is basis a knowledge understanding, right? We are talking about industries being severely hit right now. We all understand travel and tourism has taken a massive hit. We understand hospitality has taken a hit. Uh, uh, None of us are actually even talking that auto care industry and consumer durables are actually also taking a massive hit. The reason behind that is a large part, and I was reading this in a Nielsen index, is a large part of our auto industry, especially two wheelers, is largely dependent on a lot of imports from China. And with this imports frozen, exports frozen, a large part of our entire GDP, how it's sort of building the baseline, is getting impacted. Um, yes, we are going to go local. I think that's the norm. I think an interesting insight we should read about it is how Gen Z of India, the voting population, the new voting population, or Gen X is, which will going to evolve into a voting population of India, is going to change the way India is going to consume products. And this is not a study of COVID. This is a study which was done almost 3 years back or 4 years back, especially during the election time. That the newer India is a very more patriotic India. If you look at the younger ones, they are not really inclined towards traveling abroad and doing higher education abroad. They are not really about wearing the most expensive sort of items or clothes or apparels which come from abroad. They're a lot about patriotism. They're a lot about Indian. They're a lot about indie culture. They're a lot about what works for us in India. We can make it in India, and which is also resulted in how the startup industry in India has completely boomed. Right, it's just taken off in the last 6 to 7 years and given growth to some of the best global industries, being one of them. In Mobi, the company that I used to work for, is also an Indian company. It exists in 32 countries. So I think, um, yes, the consumer behavior will evolve, the consumer consumption patterns will evolve, but I think it's a long way to go. Um, it's got to also do a lot with, let's say, the example of CPG, which is what we have been discussing, Tanvi. Let's take the example of CPG. You wouldn't want to apply a cream on your face, which has not really done absolute testing, and has proven its merit on a certain problem. So let's say you are an acne prone person. You would not apply just a cream which somebody is endorsing because it's made in India. You want a solution to your acne, and you would want to go for a product which gives you that solution. Now, if an Indian company can match that standards, absolutely, why not? If Bata can produce as good shoes as Nike, why not? If Patanjali's products are as high quality on baby care as a J&J, why not? I think these are the sort of conversations which are more forward looking, and I think it is more evolutionary than sudden. So I think consumers trust has to be one. We are a fairly large independent country for a while, and I think it's been 20 years since we opened our doors to global brands coming to the country. And it has clearly seen a great growth. A lot of large investments, even currently, since the China news has sort of invited a lot of these MNCs to open doors in India. But saying that, I think the current focus of the government and the Prime Minister is to focus on local, and hopefully that's going to be a very beneficial move for the Indian economy. So I hope I have answered your question. I'm not sure, but I hope I do. Rajesh, would you like to add something here?
No, I think you've spoken about the whole thing, including how the government of India is actually looking at the advent of going local, and the PM said in his address day before yesterday about being Atmanirbhar, and I think that pretty much talks about the fact that how we will go in, but is it going to have a major impact on the consumer behavior towards brands is something that we'll need to wait and watch, because when I began my dialogue with you, I began with the saying that one of the toughest things to change has been preferences of people, and preferences are very stubborn.
That's actually a next question by Nikhil Agarwal also, which is exactly what
I was just kind of wanting to read Nikhil's question, because he was asking that with the economies or of various countries getting hit, will brand loyalty remain an option, or you know is it going to be or economies and brands itself have taken? Will it be digital or in-store buying? Will their brand loyalty actually remain an option to people?
I think we live in a world today which, and it's very early days, right? We live in a world today where we have clearly divided our consumption by essentials and non-essentials, and essentials can be perishables or non-perishables. So these words predominantly might not have been heard earlier, but if you have worked in retail, especially in modern trade, these words are very familiar to you. So when it becomes an essential, right? When you need to have a toothpaste, you will have a toothpaste. It doesn't matter whose. And to be really honest, Nikhil, to answer your question, you're absolutely bang on. The absolute impact on loyalties is very, very significant to see. We started with hand sanitizers of certain organizations and brands. Maybe 4 weeks back, you would have bought any hand sanitizer. 3 weeks down the line, you might be the best user of a X shampoo. If you don't get it, you will buy any. And this can go across not just CPG, it can go to alcohol industry. You saw what happened when they opened doors, right? Anybody was picking whatever. It can go to essentials of face cleansing. A very interesting insight by a colleague at L'Oreal told me that, things are now moving on from essentials to a pseudo essential. And what's a pseudo essential is what he told me is something like a hair color. Now you're at home, you need a haircut, you can't go out. Now grooming habits become important. So I will buy a hair color. It doesn't necessarily have to be the one that I want to buy. If I get it, yes. But if I need to buy it, I need to buy it, right? And brand loyalties are, I think, gonna take a hit, and how we perceive a brand loyalty as marketers will also have to be rethought. That we need to have some amount of leniency in understanding, because the brand loyalty might be shifting due to now multiple reasons. It's not just because of my advertising, or it's not just because of my ingredient story, or it's not just about my packaging, or it's not just about my store placement. It could be shifting due to a reason, which could be supply chain, which could be just saying essentials, which could be just saying price point. So I think these factors will start coming into play now. And like I mentioned earlier, the world post-COVID era will be the new era. It'll have many things which will be similar to the pre-COVID era, but it'll have very new definitions of how marketers and consumers perceive some of the common terminologies.
Yeah. So, in fact, Arghya, one of my colleagues, he had asked a similar question with respect to brand loyalty, and he spoke about how during these uncertain times, how will brands actually be mitigating these risks in terms of the shifting brand loyalty and consumer behavior being diverted, and also the fact that consumer attention and media consumption are possible issues why brand loyalty may not remain the same. So, I think related question to what
Interesting question, Rajesh. I
Nikhil
think
asked.
do chime in. I think it'll be great to have your insights in this. But I'll just put in like, how do you mitigate risks? How are brands coping up, right? I think if you read anywhere, most brands who are being empathetic, who are being sensitive to their consumers' understanding, and the reason why advertising dollars have absolutely negated is not just because it doesn't make sense to advertise right now. It's also because most brands are conscious of their consumer sentiments, right? Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I was just reading somewhere, the consumer sentiment has been absolutely. I'll just read it. To consumer sentiment has fallen across the Americas and Europe massively since mid-March, right? And Asian countries have maintained or increased their levels of optimism. So it shows the difference in geographical split as well, how the consumers are looking at interacting. Brands who have been sensitive to saying, we understand what's going through, let us suggest in a way that how we can still be consumer and brands together, are getting a lot of share of voice, at least, and getting a lot of praise. One of the most interesting campaigns that I think everybody learned about in praising is Lifebuoy, right? Lifebuoy took a step ahead of time. It went massive with its cleansing campaign on hand sanitizers, and it did spend a lot of dollars ensuring. It talked about education, and their communication was not just about, hey, take my hand sanitizer. It was a lot about why hand sanitizer is important, and hence Lifebuoy is an option that you could use. So I think this is where the sensitizing part will become important, and bombarding of advertisements is at least you don't enjoy it on mobile, right? Nobody likes it on TV, so
No.
it's gonna get sensitized.
So interestingly, the conversation that we've had so far is largely talking about larger companies, is talking about the bigger brands like the Unilever, the P&G, and things like those. On that note, I have a very interesting question which Vishwas has asked. Vishwas says, in a country like India, where it looks like this is going to be an increased focus of investment in MSME and SME thing, how will these companies, which are in the MSME and the SME category, actually use analytics to get relevant to all their consumers? Very interesting question, because
Very interesting.
there is a limited dollar spend there, and there is a larger consumer reach that one needs to get into. So, any thoughts on that, Nikhil?
I
I'll
think
chime in.
you will actually have better thoughts than me, Rajesh. So why didn't you start this one actually?
Yeah. So, Vishwas, your question is bang on. Given that smaller companies which have suddenly become relevant to consumers, primarily because of this whole idea of getting products that are available in the market, and the fact that there's going to be an increased spend on MSME and SME, the relevance that they would like to use is maybe get to understand your consumer a lot more, try to understand where exactly, do a geography based understanding of where exactly you're selling and what kind of products you're selling in which locations, etc. These are some of the things that they would like to quickly analyze. They would like to analyze in terms of where are the production dollars actually getting spent, Are we producing the right amount of right quantity of material? Are we producing the right material in the right quantity? Are we making sure that our products are available across? Are we investing our dollars in, let's say, especially things like supply chain, where we want to make sure that we don't run out of our products in any of the locations, and especially those locations where the consumption is high? Those would be some of the areas where the MSME and the SME companies would like to invest, because this is directly related to ROI. For them, at this point of time, the focus will have to be more on usage and less on reaching out to people. Because the more they use, I mean, especially when smaller brands are becoming bigger, the larger usage you drive, the more brand loyal consumers become of your brand. Word of mouth is something that we've all heard about, and this is something that will have to be the route to go. So the larger dollar spend in relevant analytics would be definitely in the area of supply chain, in the area of inventory management, in the area of understanding the consumer in terms of CRM, etc. So that would be my take on that particular question. You have anything to add, Nikhil?
Yeah, Rajesh, I think it's fantastic that they sort of responded to it, and just chiming in on my 2 cents, right? I mean, Vishwas, today the definition of MSME and SME has been changed a day back, right? If you look at the new definition of what an MSME versus what it used to be, has changed by almost 90 crores, right? So what could be a 10 up to 10 crore industry could be now up to 100 crore industry, right? When you change the definition of what becomes the possible or plausible size of what is defined as a particular industry segment, that means the definition of that industry itself in terms of the data, etc., that they contain changes separately. So that's point one. Point number two is, like I mentioned earlier, whatever we have been discussing right now is not just because of COVID, right? I mean, if you understand, a large part of the government of India has focused on digitization of SMEs and MSMEs in the last 5 years. They have gone ahead and said, make digital payments like an easy norm. They have gone ahead and said, all these banks should have, all these small industries should be enabled to be on digital. They have actually taken support from large biggies like Google. Google has a fantastic program. Even if you are a street side, a flower vendor, you could possibly have a small microsite for yourself, right? Which could have a phone number and you could enable home deliveries. So large digital organizations have facilitated or build products which enable the maximizing or the usage of MSMEs and SMEs products, right? Location based advertising has become important. So I think it's important that when you have that kind of support around you, you put in the right infrastructure to analyze that kind of data. See, analytics is not an expensive tool. If you look at the tools available currently around you, it's not an expensive tool. But you need to have the maturity to understand that what kind of gains it can bring to your baseline or your bottom line of the business, and then invest accordingly. So I think in the digital era that we exist today, or the future that is to bring, analytics comes hand in hand with the growth phase of digitization in an MSME and SME. So I think it's inevitable. You can't run in this era or 6 months down the line as an MSME or SME and completely be isolated from digital channels, and hence be completely isolated from analytics part of your business, which is where your revenue is getting impacted. So I think it is absolutely hand in hand.
Uh, Another related question from Swapnil is, we've seen a lot of ups and downs in the market, but COVID probably is one of the worst hitting scenarios that we've seen to date. Will this have a huge impact on the market, on the companies which are into e-commerce and also the digital market? And is there an opportunity that post-COVID things will actually retract back to where it was before?
I think you have to look at each industry vertical separately. There is no one common answer for all, and I think each opportunity is sort of a challenge also, and also face sort of poises to become a growth opportunity for a particular sector. So some industry sectors have been massively hit. Retail, which predominantly existed purely from a brick and mortar perspective, fashion, apparel, jewelry, extremely hit, right? That is also retail, by the way. But retail also from a sense which is modern trade, which says groceries, Walmarts, big bazaars, extremely doing well, by the way. Global Walmart figures have been extremely promising because people have sort of went into that hoarding mentality and stockpiling, which has led, the number of days that the stock had to be stored to be almost become negligible, and stocks flying off the shelf, right? Which is a great thing for any retail, at least brick and mortar retail still, which sort of sells that. E-commerce, like I mentioned earlier, is gonna double. I mean, there is no stopping it. It was always poised to become a large part of the Indian economy and the global economy. It is already at. So, going forward in the next 6 months, I think it will only change. Going to a second question, that post COVID, will the market retract to what it is like before? Um, I am a believer. I mean, again, me and Rajesh, or each one of us on this forum, can have very different views on this. I am a believer. I think India will jump back. I think it's a matter of couple of months, 3 months, but there will be a very different set of norms. Um, Industries have been massively impacted, Swapnil. I'm an ex L'Oreal person. Makeup runs in our blood. I worked there for almost 7.5, 8 years. Makeup industry is massively impacted. And from what I understand, there is no path to recovery as well, right? As long as women and men or whoever is going to continue to wear masks, and as long as mask is going to be existence, which is poised to be in existence for at least the next 6 months, foreseeable future, makeup industry is going to be massively hit. It's a large part of most CPG clients. So it'll be different scenarios, individualistic scenarios for each industry. Within those industries, also micro, macro sort of scenarios for each of the product ranges. One fit the bill for all is not really the world of today, as you can clearly see. Different people are getting impacted in different ways. There are certain industries like gaming, which is absolutely booming right now. It was always growing. Right now, people in the monetization space, in the gaming space, they're absolutely growing, tremendously growing at triple digits, right? So I think economy is going to bounce back. I am a firm believer, but it's going to be a little different from how the norm used to be. Rajesh, your thoughts?
Yeah, I am in agreement with you on that. As you said, most of us have a different thought on that. I think I am of the fact that it will bounce back. It will bounce back to this thing, but of course, the bounce back will happen with a new reality, and that reality is going to be something that most of the industries will have to contend with. The whole fact that people will now be a lot more conscious of ganging up together in places like those, and therefore businesses like malls, cinemas, and things like those may see a hit. We may not see overcrowded trains and things like those immediately. It may take some time before people kind of bunch up together at the same place. So therefore, the QSRs can have an impact because of this. Any dad of young children might think twice before taking his kids to a McDonald's for the casual weekend burger, and those are some of the things that one will have to contend with when the new change happens. However, economy will definitely bounce back. It will find new ways of bouncing back in terms of the lost dollar. How is that going to happen? Already there are talks about automotive as an industry, and the used car industry in India is going to become a much bigger number in terms of used car sales. It's going to happen as soon as the COVID thing moves out. So there are going to be different industries which are going to recover in different speeds. Most of us are seeing that technology is actually making one of the fastest comebacks because of the entire requirement of the digital transformation that industries are now looking at. Given that this is the time for us to start looking at implementing digital transformation within our organization, technology is actually taking the fastest leap back into normalcy. Actually, very interesting to this is the question that Harsh has asked, where saying what will the new end-to-end consumer experience be like, and therefore how are our supply chain norms going to be different to be taking care of this end-to-end consumer experience? I think this is a very interesting question
Good
given the
question.
current.
No, I think superb question. I think the answer to this is if I knew, I would be a millionaire. Uh, but I think the supply chain 4.0 is sort of what everybody is talking about. Supply chain 4.0, what it predominantly means is that you have a very robust supply chain ecosystem. Your number of days NOD on deliveries is absolutely sort of minimized. The futuristic trends talk about robo deliveries. The futuristic trends are talking about reducing manual intervention to the supply chain ecosystem. You're talking about creating automated delivery drones, automated robo deliveries coming into existence. So it's a beautiful scenario of what supply chain will be, but I think there are smarter and much more educated people from the supply chain side who will be putting better brains to it. But I think a beautiful end-to-end customer experience, and I strongly believe this is not just because of COVID, is integrating your offline usage and understanding of your consumer with his mobile usage habits. Uh, any brands or consumer-centric brands who have been able to achieve this or able to tie it back together in the new era post-COVID would have really cracked it right there. And once you have a clear understanding of who your consumer is and where you can find him online and offline, you really talk about minimal spillage of your advertising dollars. That brings profitability back to your bottom line. That spillage also, the lack of spillage also brings efficiency into your supply chain, because what you produce is essentially what is getting consumed in the most optimal levels, and it is a best case scenario. So I think that will be the new consumer experience being designed for future. These are my thoughts.
Great. So what we will do is, keeping our eyes on the clock, we'll take the last two questions, Nikhil.
Sure.
Interestingly, Saurav has asked another very interesting question. Saurav says that, does this current social distancing norm, does this whole thing about drop in shopping frequency of people into the store, loss of the number of consumers that will come into a retail store and things like this, is it going to make life difficult for newer products, newer brands to actually enter the market?
So I think life is difficult for existing products itself, right? So any new entrant in the see, I'll be honest with you. I mean, any new entrant to come into a country like India and establish is not an easy task, especially for consumer brands. When you talk, and the reason why I say this is not because India is a difficult country to start new brands. It just takes a lot from an advertising lens to make sure that your recall is there from a consumer lens. Unless you talk about an absolutely new category, let's say an Uber and an Ola, which is a new category, right? You are able to create that niche. But if I say an Uber and Ola, you really can't think of a third, right? And that's the power of the amount of advertising dollars that you have to spend. You want to, it's pretty easy sort of to make a Coca-Cola, right? Anybody can make it. But why is there no Coca-Cola and there is only one Pepsi and only one Coke, right? Because it's difficult to penetrate the market. It requires a lot of muscle strength in terms of your distribution dollars, in terms of your advertising dollars, and it becomes a very uphill task. And especially when you talk about retail, each retail shelf space costs a lot. You'll be surprised that the store near your house, the little store near your house, for the 3 shampoos that they have kept, which you can see, he must be getting paid more than 1,000 rupees just for keeping those 3 shampoo facings, which you can see, just for keeping those 3 shampoo facings, which you can see. Now the revenue from it is completely separate, right? So I think any new brand, I mean, and to be honest with you, the other answer to your question is, with this stockpiling and hoarding mentality, what people are not understanding is, with the reduced frequency to retail, if you buy a 3 kilo atta, okay, the probability is, if you have already bought a 3 kilo atta, you are not going to go to the retail store and buy a 3 kilo atta again. That means no other atta brand who advertises to you is going to affect your buying behavior, because it's an absolute waste of advertising dollars. And that is the other effect that retail is going to see. Now, till now, it has not seen. Right now, it's too early, but they are already starting to realize that the stockpiling, once you do it, you're not coming back to the store to buy it again, right? Because we are not living in the norm where month end we are buying. What we are doing right now is you're buying 10 kilos instead of 2 kilos. And when you buy 10 kilos, you don't come back for 3 months. So this is all the changes that the industry is seeing, and brands are coping up to.
So actually, I think we've gone one full circle in terms of understanding that the current COVID situation and the consumer behavior that it has led to. Uh, Sanket has actually asked a very nice question at the end. He says, what do you think it's going to do to the travel industry? Are people going to be traveling anymore? Or for the next couple of years, people are going to say, no, I'm fine staying at home. I'm fine staying within my locality till this whole COVID thing disappears. So how will companies who are in the hospitality business, who are in the travel business, actually cope with this whole shift in consumer thinking? Or am I being too naive to see, or am I being too naive to see that once all this eases out a bit, travel is actually going to get the next biggest boom from consumers because they're so holed up in their houses that they all want to go to the nearest mountain they have. So, what are your thoughts on this, Nikhil?
My thoughts are as good as yours, and as good as the person who has asked the question. That I don't know. I feel from whatever I have read and whatever I have been reading across multiple reports, across multiple researchers, across multiple opinions, is that travel uh, is not going to recover, at least for the next 3 to 6 months, till there is a vaccine, and an accessible vaccine which is easily available, sustainable, and easily deliverable to smallest and remotest areas. Travel is not going to look the same. And whether it's from as basic as commuting travel, which could be your Ubers and Olas, to commuting travel as trains and air travel, and then going to larger things which could be holidaying, it's hard to say that it's going to resume or be the same in the next 6 months. And as you can read, just within 35 to 45 days of these businesses are sort of feeling the brunt. Some of the largest ones have filed for bankruptcy. One of the oldest running airlines, Avianca, has filed for bankruptcy. Now imagine 45 days of this hit, and that is also not a complete hit. It has completely transformed their bottom line into bankruptcy. So I think I feel for the travel sector. I think yes, the consumer sentiment says I'm going to go to the next mountain as soon as possible, but the norms might not allow you to go to the mountain, or there might be a border ceiling, or there are factors which are beyond your controlled metrics. So I mean, what you need to understand is travel will possibly never be the same until there's a vaccination accessible, deliverable to the smallest areas, and purchasable, which is what I meant by accessible. It's not going to be the same, till the vaccination comes. So I think those are my thoughts. I think very interestingly, Cypria has also asked something on marketing and PR teams are teaming up to communicate on brand responses and measures
I was about to come to that question. Yes, please go ahead, Nikhil.
And the measures that they're taking to keep employees and customers safe. How are they figured? Or what they're communicating effectively? Is there a way to measure? Do these practices work? I mean, Cypria, I think a very interesting question. PR is playing an extremely crucial role on two aspects, right? One, from an internal lens, on how do you ensure that the impact of COVID from a financial lens is being communicated rightfully to internal stakeholders, and the impact of the same is also being communicated rightfully to the industry, which is concerned and with the financial losses that the economy is facing right now. So a lot of brands have taken very interestingly articles and earlier, which they did not used to speak about, is around employee centricity, right? A big part of marketing, especially in the startup ecosystem, is also revolves around how you are as an employer. If you see a lot of articles recently, I just was seeing on my WhatsApp today a great article that Asian Paints amidst all the brands which are letting go of people, salary cuts happening, pay cuts happening, etc., etc. Asian Paints has actually gone on paper today in Economic Times, has said, you know what, we're going to pay a big hike and we're going to ensure the employee morale is boosted.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody on this webinar to get any ideas, but I think different mechanisms. These are all PR and marketing working together. A more marketing lens, like I explained as an example, is Lifebuoy, who has taken the road of education via their PR teams, via their marketing spends, via their media spends, to say they're going to educate the segment about the use of hand sanitizer, which is a very small segment, by the way. Now it has become a big segment. 3 months back, it was a negligent segment which people didn't talk about. So I think I hope that sort of answers your question well.
And finally, like Mohammed is asking, this is the time for us to start revisiting all the optimizing engines of the predictive engines that we've done, where consumer behavior has been seen as a large variable? Yeah, I'd like to say yes, Mohammed. We definitely need to keep the consumer behavior in mind with the current times. There wouldn't be any past study of a behavior of this sort, and therefore any optimization that will need to be done will need to be done with the current data that we are seeing. The last 45 data, as Nikhil was mentioning, was enough to shut down large companies due to bankruptcy. So I think the current consumer behavior will have to be seen in the right earnest to see how it is going to have a big impact on all the variables that are arising out of a consumer behavior. So yes, you may have to redo the optimization engines there. You may have to redo the predictive engines there for getting the right kind of results about what consumers are feeling right now. So therefore, at this point of time, it's very important for us to understand what the consumer is thinking about. Nikhil, your thoughts?
Absolutely echo your I absolutely echo what your thoughts. I think the only thing to add in as a trend here right now, as per Google, is that negative keywords have taken the precedence, right? So you need to look at your search engine optimization strategies with a correlation to negative keywords as well. You need to see trends in advance, and that's what search engine optimization is all about, right? You need to look at the negative trends. You need to prepare optimizing for keywords in advance which you think might become a trend in the foreseeable 15 days or 1 month, and that's how you'll become a good digital brand. And I think these are interesting times for digital guys. Actually, they are the only economy which is going to prosper, and they are prospering, and they're finding new roads. So I think yes, completely has to be looked at a different perspective.
Awesome. So Nikhil, thank you very much for spending your time with us. I think you took out over an hour of your time to spend with us today in terms of discussing the new world order, as we had to call it, or the paradigm shift in the consumer behavior, not just now, but let's say over the last 2 to 3 months. And it was extremely insightful to discuss this with you. And I think everybody who's on this meeting, on this webinar, enjoyed it as thoroughly. I mean, I'm very happy to see so many responses in terms of interactions come from everybody. So thank you very much. I think on behalf of all of us, we thank you a lot for spending your time and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Rajesh. It was absolutely pleasure. I think the kind of knowledge that you bring is extremely exciting. The kind of questions, we had a good 70 people audience. I think thank you guys for sharing your thoughts, having this great webinar. Extremely excited about the prospects of what the new world will bring, and I wish you guys the safety. I wish you guys the very best. Stay safe, stay indoors, and hope we can connect again with the fine team globally and discuss more thoughts.
Definitely, Nikhil. Thank you very much. So Tanu, any last words from your side? So I think thanks very much for Tanu and her team for putting this together.
Thank you, Tanu. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Nikhil, Pawan, Tanu.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikhil. Thank you, Rajesh. And, indeed, it was an amazing session, and the kind of responses we've got, and people were so excited. We'll definitely plan to do this, more. So, Nikhil and Rajesh, I think it's time. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
Sure. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.